What's going on? Welcome into the Matt Bernier Show, part of the In the Money Media Network. My name is Matt Bernier. You can follow me on Twitter at Bernier_Matt. Today is Monday, March the 8th, 2021. This is episode 56 of the show. However you listen to this thing, thank you for doing so. Many ways for you to find this program. If you're somebody who listens audio only, you've got Apple Podcasts, Spotify, SoundCloud, In the Money Podcast, you name it. Basically anywhere you listen to your podcasts, you can find this show, along with all the other programs that are produced by In the Money Media. I would also just encourage you to head on over to inthemoneypodcast.com, whether you listen to the shows over there or not, simply because there is great content produced all throughout the week. Written analysis, all sorts of different good things over on inthemoneypodcast.com. You can also take a look and see what else there is as far as offerings are concerned within the Money Plus. Yeah, a little bit of a fee, but you're going to get exclusive content that you can't just get over on the website. So be sure to check that out. If you're somebody who watches over on YouTube, like so many of you do, head on over to YouTube, search bar, Matt Bernier Show. You'll find this episode along with the 55 prior. I feel like there's a diehard group of folks who watch over on YouTube. And then there are the folks who we end up having more people listen as far as the podcasts go. And I understand it's much more mobile and things like that. I feel like episodes like this and really just kind of this time of the year, if you are someone who only listens to the audio, I would encourage you to check out the YouTube video because these are the sort of shows that I think evergreen might not, I wouldn't say evergreen in the truest sense, but when we go through and we look at Kentucky Derby prep races and we just talk about reviews in general, because that's what the show is going to be this week. Episode 56 is an old school review. Those of you that used to watch along and listen when I was over at the Racing Forum doing the sort of recap shows, that's exactly what this week is. There's going to be very little handicapping for what's to come. It's going to be a great deal of looking back at what we saw this past weekend, specifically with the 3-year-olds. And we'll get more into that in a little bit. But if you are someone who listens audio only, I would encourage you to check out the YouTube channel simply because you're going to get to see some of the replays and see some of the spots that maybe I interpret as important or noteworthy or things that you can incorporate into your handicapping going forward. Then you can always refer back to them. And I think that's always one of the nice things about something like YouTube or any other video piece of this. So basically, in a nutshell, we're going to be looking back at the San Felipe from Santa Anita Park, the Tampa Bay Derby from Tampa Bay Downs, and the Gotham from Aqueduct. And then there'll be a quick segment at the end looking at the 2 grade 1s out in Southern California, the Kilroe Mile as well as the Santa Anita Handicap. TBD if there's going to be video on those two. It may just be sort of a rapid fire reaction piece to that. But the vast majority of this episode is going to be diving into the 3 Derby preps and what does it mean going forward. There will be no Friday feature this week. There were 2 folks who correctly identified the winner last week. Via the draw, Gary Mannion was the winner. Unfortunately, I never heard back from Gary. Another person who correctly identified the winner was Michael Bryant. So what I'd like to do for next week anyway, it's going to be as simple as this. Those 2 individuals, you can email me at bernier.matt89@gmail.com. Let me know if you're available for next Monday to go over the Friday feature. But I also would like one other person, and it can be any listener. You're going to have to leave your sort of entry beneath the video player on YouTube, and all you need to do is just write Friday feature. That's it. Nothing more than that, because worst case scenario, the 2 individuals who were correct last week, they don't get back, and if you are the one chosen from the folks who just throw their name in the hat, well, then you know what you're going to be on next week. You don't even have to win the contest, as is sort of the standard situation going forward with this thing. Best case scenario, those 2 gentlemen, as well as anyone who ends up being selected from the folks who get involved beneath the video player on YouTube this week, we can have 4 people, and we will be discussing some sort of multi-race sequence, in all likelihood to pick 4. And we can kind of do a similar exercise to what we've done in some of these other past episodes in recent memory. So that's where things stand with the Friday feature. You want to be involved next week, hopefully along with both Gary Mannion and Michael Bryant. You need to leave a comment beneath the video player on YouTube, and all it needs to say for you to officially be entered is Friday feature. Doesn't need to be anything else other than that, but by all means, I like to hear comments about thoughts on the races that are discussed on the show, thoughts about other horses who I may have missed, whether you agree, disagree, whatever it may be. The more interaction, the better. And this goes across all the platforms. Please rate, review, and subscribe. So, with all that being said, let's actually get into it now. Let's go back and we'll take a look at what Well, the cat's out of the bag. Not only was it one of the fastest prep races we've seen for the Kentucky Derby in many, many years, for my money, it is far and away going to be the most important prep. At least it is to date, and I'll be stunned if it's not going forward. The most important prep for the 2021 Kentucky Derby season, the San Felipe from Santa Anita. Let's go back and take a look at that from this past Saturday. San Felipe at Santa Anita on Saturday. Perhaps, I don't want to say turn the Derby prep season on its ear, but in many ways change the complexion of things anyway, depending on if you believe Life is Good can continue on at this rate, because if he does, it's going to be very difficult for anyone to beat him. That includes the 2-year-old champion Essential Quality. That includes Greatest Honor down in South Florida. That includes anyone. Because if this is what this horse is and potentially could be, boy, it's going to be tough to get by him. They break from the gate. You're going to see down on the inside, that is the number 1 Life is Good with Mike Smith aboard. They're going to go right to the front. No surprise there. The horse that takes up sort of the, let's call it the stalking position, but also a little bit of teamwork here. Medina Spirit and John Velasquez, they're going to float out to about the 3-4 path. Make sure that you give Life is Good every opportunity to just sort of settle into himself, find that stride. Very similar to what we saw with Arrowgate back in the 2016 Travers, where a little bit of teamwork, give him a little bit of a opening down on the inside, make sure he can clear off and go to the front. 23-3 for the opening quarter, 46-4 for the opening half. What, all things considered, pretty reasonable fractions for this kind of horse of this talent level specifically. You also see a couple other runners in here. The number 2 is Dream Shake. First-time winners, first-time 2 turns for Peter Urton after a very impressive career debut victory. And then the 7. That'll be the other horse we'll touch on. That's Roman Centurion trying to rally from the back of the pack. He's always going to be up against it in Southern California. We'll get into that a little bit more when we see the race in its entirety. At this point, you're going to see Mike Smith's moving very comfortably. Dream Shake looks like he's going to make a bit of a move to try to get into contention. He ultimately flattens out down the lane, and that's another piece that we'll dive into after we've seen and let the dust settle. But you're about to see just a complete blowout performance from Life is Good. He puts the boots to this field, wins by 8 lengths, stops the clock in 142.18, ultimately leads to a 107 Beyer speed figure and a 130 Timeform US rating. These are astronomical figures for a 3-year-old at the beginning of March of their campaign. This is a massive, massive performance from this racehorse. Now, I'm going to get into the sort of, let's call it nuts and bolts anyway. The nitpicking, if you will. I was on ABR's live stream on Saturday with Dan Torgman, Bram Weinstein, among others. And Bram got a kick out of the fact that I was trying to find faults in this performance after it happened. But I think that's what you're supposed to do with a horse who is going to be 1-10 in his next start, probably closer to 1-20. And if he gets through that start, he's probably, 8-5 in the Kentucky Derby? Somewhere thereabouts? Keep in mind, Life is Good is only making his 3rd lifetime start. In his 2nd lifetime start, first time going 2 turns, that was the Sham Stakes, which Medina Spirit made that late run, and it looked like it was really, really close, when in reality, it wasn't close at all. Life is Good got very green at the end of that race and just sort of pulled himself up. Led me to make the comparison, that race specifically, the Sham, comparing it to the 2020 Haskell, in which Authentic was clear by 4 lengths. It looks like New York Traffic makes this big late move, when in reality, that was never the case. Authentic was his own worst enemy and just got kind of goofy out there on the front end. I feel like that's exactly what we saw in the Sham with Life is Good. I think he's very green. Now, when you, in that kind of context, in that thought, keep an eye on a couple things here with Life is Good. Remember onto the backside first time through. They come off the first turn, and you're going to see right here, he floats out into the middle of the track. If you'll recall, and you can find the replays of it, this is exactly the same thing Authentic did in the Haskell. On his own volition, floated out into the 3-4 path, mainly because he's just green and kind of goofy out there. A big baby. Nothing wrong with that. Just doesn't mentally have it all together just yet. For this horse to do what he does and not have all of the mental sorts figured out is a scary proposition for anyone. Because theoretically, the more mature you get mentally, the better off you're going to be. You're going to be able to keep to your task at hand And if that's the case, you're not going to see him change leads early like he does here. And again, fractionally early. I'm nitpicking because you have to nitpick these sort of things. I think you're supposed to. He's going to change leads fractionally early, not terribly, right about there, a little early. And then he's going to float well out into the middle of the racetrack. And you don't see that from Bob Baffert trained horses. You just don't. It's not typical anyway. Authentic did it. Authentic ended up being a very, very nice racehorse when all was said and done, but it took him some time to go through that maturation process. With this horse right here, the difference is, I think there are very, very real comparisons between the two. Life is Good and Authentic. The difference is, I think you can make a legitimate argument that Life is Good is considerably more talented naturally than Authentic is and was. And I don't say that lightly. Authentic won the Kentucky Derby and the Breeders' Cup Classic last year. And I think there's a legitimate case to be made that Life is Good is a considerably more talented horse naturally. That he doesn't have the experience. He doesn't have age on his side. He doesn't have any of this sort of stuff on his side at this point. He's run 3 times. But some of the numbers that he's produced already make him a freak of nature in the best way possible. I think he'll iron this stuff out in time. Now, the interesting piece to that becomes, well, how much time does he need to get that stuff ironed out? And to take it another step, does it make a difference when he's 10 lengths clear? The water will get deeper. I think this is the best field that has been assembled for a Derby prep in 2021. I know some people, I'm quite surprised actually to see how many people have said, oh yeah, but he beat a terrible field. Let's see what happens, when he gets to Louisville. Well, Louisville, yeah, you're going to get the best of the best from all jurisdictions. But in my opinion, this group of horses that he beat is the best field that's been assembled thus far. I think Medina Spirit is legitimately a top 3 or 4 3-year-old. I think he's a very talented horse. He's another one that has a little bit of maturing to do, but you're seeing those moves forward, those steps forward as far as kind of polishing it up a little bit. I think he's a legitimate talent. Any other year, he's probably not vying for favoritism with essential quality, but he is that next tier. He is that sort of 2, 3, 4, 5 category. The problem is he's 8 lengths behind his uncoupled stablemate as is right now. And it feels like Life is Good's only going to get better. And I know some folks want to look at it and say a race like this early in a horse's campaign can take some of the starch out of him. There's no question about it. It can definitely knock him back a bit. But to me, it's more to do with the fact that he still doesn't, in my opinion, know what he's doing. I think there's reason to believe that when he actually focuses and really kind of gets keyed in, that he's only going to get better. And that's a terrifying prospect. Let's talk about some of the horses that finished behind Life is Good before we get back to him and button this thing up. Dream Shakedown on the inside. I think this was a good effort all around for him for the first time going a route of ground and the first time taking on winners. I thought for a moment here at the top of the lane he was going to be a very clear-cut second place finisher. And he ended up flattening out and faded to third. Well, what do you want to do with that? To me, it's a product of 2 things. That maybe this distance first time through got to him a little bit. He was also a little keen down the backside beneath Joel. He pulled himself into the race probably a little earlier than ideal. But in this position right here, you can see he's starting to get tired. I'm not going to hold that against him. I think this is a very productive effort. I think he's going to move forward out of this. I would love the connections, and it sounds like this is something that they're considering. It sounds like the Santa Anita Derby is on the table, but I'd love them to send him to Keeneland and run in the Bluegrass because I think he would be a legitimate player in there. Medina Spirit. If you'll recall, in the most recent run, the Bob Lewis, right around this point in the race, he had already changed over to his right lead, and it looked like Roman Centurion and Hot Rod Charlie were going to go right on by, and instead he re-engages in deep stretch and holds them off. That, to me, signified a horse that was still kind of green, kind of goofy. Well, you're going to notice, just from a mechanical standpoint, he does everything very on cue. He waits here, turn, change leads, digs in, passes this horse, you're going to see the ears go up just before the wire. But all things considered, I thought this was a step forward from that most recent run in the Bob Lewis. And again, I think this is the kind of horse that any other year, you're probably talking about a viable alternative to a horse like Essential Quality. He's got figs, he's got seasoning, he's got the connections, all of these things. If you take Life is Good out of the equation, Medina Spirit, in all likelihood, has won the Sham, the Bob Lewis, and the San Felipe. It's not his fault that he's just run into a freak of nature in these two races. So I think Medina Spirit is the goods. I would love them to send him to Arkansas for the Arkansas Derby. Get him away from Life is Good. He doesn't need to run into him ever again, or at least until the Derby anyway. As far as Roman Centurion back here is concerned, if you'll recall, I said it after that race. I like to try to identify horses who I believe are running in the wrong jurisdiction. And when I say that, it's not that I think that they, when I don't mean that they're in the wrong jurisdiction. I mean, for them to actually get the most out of their ability, they can't run here. Because this is a track and this is a circuit, including Del Mar, that trying to come from way out of it is just not, it's just not going to work long term. Maybe you'll pick up a couple of them, but to maximize potential, I think a horse like Roman Centurion needs to get out of Southern California and get to the East Coast. I personally would love to see him in the Wood Memorial. I think that's, at least from what I've read, on the table. You'll see him. He just picks up some pieces here late, but I get the impression he'll run all day. And when you look at the landscape of things, that running style is never going to work in Southern California, specifically Santa Anita. You don't want to run into Life is Good again. You send him to Aqueduct over a track that's yielding very slow times. It's a tiring surface. And outside of a horse like Risk Taking, and depending on what you think of him, who are you terrified of? I would love to see him go to New York and take your chances there. Will it work? Who knows? But I think you're at least giving yourself every opportunity to be successful, as opposed to running him back in Southern California. I just don't think you're going to get the most out of that racehorse down there at Santa Anita or at Del Mar. So when it comes down to the numbers, a 107 buyer for Life is Good, a 130 time form US rating is what I saw. Medina Spirit a 95, Dream Shake a 91, Roman Centurion an 86. I believe these numbers are on the conservative side. I think you could move all of them up 3 to 4 to maybe even 5 points. If you want to use the 20-point differential between the Timeform US ratings and the buyer scale, there's your 110 or so. And that would, again, kind of be on par with, if you tacked on 3 points, let's say. And this is a very easy way without going into all the actual, the minutia of how the figures are created, because I had some folks sending me, other races, the final times have been much faster. It's all relative to the times that the racetrack is yielding, and then comparing those to the par level, the par for the level, the average time that this group would typically produce. So tracks can be sped up and slowed down depending on maintenance or weather or a number of different things. For this given day, it seemed abundantly clear when I was on the ABR stream that this was going to be an off-the-charts fast race, because all you needed to do, and you needed the whole day in its entirety to really kind of confirm one way or the other, but every other dirt race yielded times that you would kind of expect, that were very much on par, made sense. And the real race to sort of compare this race to, given that it was at a mile and a 16th, was the second race on the card at a mile and a 16th for older allowance types. A horse called Mastering won for Baffert. He's typically a low 90, high 80 type. He clocked 143.86 compared to the 142.18 here for Life is Good. I mean, you're talking about 8 to 9 lengths difference right there. And no surprise, well, I shouldn't say this. No surprise. I think based on what those horses are capable of running, Bold Endeavor, the runner-up, he earned a 91. His most recent start, he earned a 94. Kershaw, he earned an 84. His most recent start, he earned a 91. And I get it, that was a few months back. But, I mean, this is a horse who is typically in that high 80, low 90 range. I think there's reason to believe those numbers could be ticked up a little bit. And then, accordingly, you tick up the numbers you're looking at on the screen right now a little bit. Life is Good goes up into that 110 range. that 111 range. Medina Spirit, if you added 3 to 4 points to the 95 that he officially earned on the buyer scale here for this race, that puts him at a 98 or a 99, which is the same number he earned in the Sham 3 starts back, a 99. Dream Shake in his career debut, he earned a 96. If you tack on 3 to 4 points, that 91 all of a sudden goes to a 94 or a 95, which is very close to equaling what he did just a few weeks ago. Same goes for Roman Centurion. 86 here on Saturday. He earned a 91 in that most recent start in the Bob Lewis. Give him 4 or 5 more, he effectively replicated that most recent start. So I think there's reason to believe, if you want, to say that this number, I'm not saying it's wrong, I'm saying it's on the conservative side, that it could even be faster than what is published, which then led me to go down a little bit of a rabbit hole. And if you follow me on Twitter, there's a thread out there. On Monday, I was just curious. I'm going through and trying to put it into context of just how fast this race was for Life is Good. Horses this age at this time of year, they don't run that fast. They just don't. And for him to do it the way that he did, I think it's an indicator of what we're dealing with here. We're dealing with potentially a special talent. Justify is the first name that many people, I'm sure, will come to mind. In February of his 3-year-old campaign, his career debut, he earned a 104. Came back and earned a 101 in March, a 107. So the same 107 that Life is Good earned, he earned that in the Santa Anita Derby. So it took him an extra month to earn this fig. And again, in my opinion, draw a line through that, bold that. In my opinion, this 107 buyer is a conservative 107. Could be closer to 110, 111, 112. American Pharaoh. Granted, he had a significant foundation. Not significant, but he had enough of a foundation as a 2-year-old. He didn't make his 3-year-old debut until the middle of March. He earned a 100 buyer. Came back in April in the Arkansas Derby, 105. Equaled that in the Kentucky Derby. The Preakness, he earned a 102. And then the Belmont Stakes, he earned a 105. I'm not going to get into the back half of the campaign for that year because it doesn't apply to what I'm talking about here. But point is, he didn't run as fast as Life is Good has already run. Not comparing them, not saying he's going to turn into American Pharaoh, just stating facts. Authentic, who I really genuinely believe there are proper similarities between these two horses. Authentic didn't earn a number this fast until winning the Breeders' Cup Classic last November. He didn't earn a triple-digit buyer until July. Now, I brought up sort of the goofiness and the greenness thing. Authentic was the big winner of the altered COVID schedule of 2020 because I don't think he would have won the Kentucky Derby if it was run the first Saturday in May because of his greenness. That could potentially be to the detriment of Life is Good. If you're trying to find these little holes, you're trying to find a reason to play against a 1-10 shot or the first Saturday in May, an 8-5 shot or a 7-5 shot against 19 other horses, if he doesn't show in the Santa Anita Derby that mentally he is taking those steps forward, then maybe you're drawing up a scenario in which, look, he's going to go to a track that he's never seen before, Churchill Downs. He's going to ship out of California for the first time, A, to Churchill Downs, B, in front of some crowd. I don't know how large it'll be, but it'll be a decent enough size. That's C. D, this massive monstrosity of a property with a wicked board that looks like, something that you pulled from AT&T Stadium in Dallas. So if he's getting distracted by the big screen in the infield at Santa Anita, what's he going to think when he sees that thing towering over the racetrack in Louisville? And you're going to have 19 other horses that you're running with. I'm not in a rush to bet against this horse. I think again, the reason I'm going through and bringing up some of these names is to just kind of hammer home, we're not talking about a common performance that we see. This is not something that typically happens this time of year to this extent. But you're supposed to nitpick these sort of things. We're getting closer and closer to the NFL draft. You're supposed to go through and try to find reasons to knock certain quarterbacks that may or may not end up being the bee's knees at the next level. You find some kid like Trey Lance who looks like $1 million against entirely inferior. Well, Is that going to translate? That's up to you as the handicapper, because it's effectively what these draft people are doing. GMs, front office personnel, you're handicapping. You're trying to figure out who's going to be the one that fits at the next level. You get somebody like Mac Jones, who, look, won the national championship, basically had an all-star team in front of him to play with. Well, is he that good, or did he play that well because of the team, or because he's actually that good? These are the sort of things. So it's not just the horse racing thing. Oh, he won by 100. What are you complaining about? It's not complaining, A. B, it's just trying. You're just analyzing the situation, and you're looking for things that could potentially be red flags going forward. All that being said, I don't even know if it matters, because he's that much faster than everyone else, including essential quality to this point. We're not talking a length faster. He's lengths faster than the 2-year-old champion at this point. And I just said last week, and I believe this, essential quality could be a superstar. But he's got lengths, plural, to make up if this is what this horse is. Lengths. Not a length, lengths. Other horses that I quick ran through trying to find some sort of a comparison. Firing Line and Dortmund, they fit, just based on the numbers that they earned as early as they did in their 3-year-old season. Firing Line and Dortmund both earned 104s in February. They came back in March in different races, a 103 and a 104. Dortmund earned a 106 in April. You've got 104, 103, 101. None of them earned 107s. Maximum Security, he didn't earn a figure this fast until the Cigar Mile. And we know that, again, don't need to go down the maximum security hole. 'Tis the Law. He did. He earned a 109, which is a gaudy number. That came in August. To this point, in February, he earned a 100. In late March, he earned a 96. In June, he earned a 100. He's not sniffing a 107. And I can't underscore it enough, a conservative 107. The two that I kept coming back to that seemed to make the most sense, in my opinion, were Bodemeister and California Chrome. Bodemeister didn't debut until the middle of January of his 3-year-old season. He earned an 82 in the debut. Came back and earned a 101 in February, a 101 in March, a 108 in April, a 99 the first Saturday in May, which in hindsight probably should have been faster given the way he and I'll Have Another ran in Baltimore just 2 weeks later, where he earned a 109. So the timing isn't perfect, and again, kind of hammering the point that Bodemeister earned a 101 at this point in his season, well short of the 107, if not higher, that Life is Good earned. He came back and earned a 108 in his next start. I'm not saying that Life is Good is going to earn a 108 in his next start, but it's not out of the realm of possibility. And again, if you also prescribe to the idea that he's mentally not a completed project by a long shot, and if he gets it together even more, he could theoretically be better. That's a scary thought for everybody else that's not named Life is Good and everybody that's associated with him. And then the other horse, again, that I mentioned was California Chrome. Now, Chrome is a little bit different because it seems like he ran 25 times as a 2-year-old before he got to his 3-year-old season. But from a figure standpoint, to earn the numbers he did as early as he did, comparing to Life is Good. His first start as a 3-year-old, he earned an 88 Beyer. He came back in the San Felipe and earned a 108. So technically a point higher than what Life is Good did, but very much in the same vein. Won by 100. Did it rather easily. Came back and won the Santa Anita Derby with a 107 Beyer. Wins the Kentucky Derby with a 97. The Preakness with a 105. The Belmont Stakes with a 98. And then he had some time off before the poor effort in the Pennsylvania Derby and a 113 in the Breeders' Cup Classic that year. All I'm saying is what you saw on Saturday is atypical of even the best 3-year-olds this time of year in recent memory. I had some folks, throw out other names from years farther back. I Want Revenge. You go into a horse like Escondrea, who earned a giant fig, I believe, in the Wood Memorial, Bellamy Road in the Wood Memorial. But again, we're going farther back and not this early. It's still a month later. And a month may not sound like a lot, but it's still a month at a time when these 3-year-olds are improving by leaps and bounds, start to start. So, no, I'm not sitting here telling you Life is Good is going to crank out a 120 in his next start. But it's just to hammer home the idea that what you saw on Saturday, I mean, this is putting him, as far as numbers go, in very interesting space. The only other horse that I could think of, and I didn't tweet about him in that thread, and unfortunately he delivered a giant performance and then he got hurt and we never saw him again, was Mastery. He's the only other one that I could think of, and if I forgot someone, please let me know beneath the comment section on YouTube. But it was a sparkling performance, but there was also enough in there that if you want to play devil's advocate, you can go through and say, you know what, you're going to need to do this a little bit better in the grand scheme of things. But it was also such an outrageous performance that the folks who just look at numbers and say, you got no shot, boys. Nobody else is going to run with you. And frankly, I can't really argue with you at this point. 107 buyer for Life is Good, winning the San Felipe. And I'll give you just the sort of the final thought for those next 3 runners. Medina Spirit, give me the Arkansas Derby. Dream Shake, give me the Bluegrass. Roman Centurion, give me the Wood Memorial. I think they all have legitimate chances to win those races, regardless of who shows up. If they all choose to come back in the Santa Anita Derby, I think they're running for second. Life is Good, 107 buyer, 130 Timeform US rating. Outrageous numbers this early in the season for a 3-year-old. Let me know your thoughts about this race and any of these runners beneath the video player on YouTube or on Twitter at Bernier_Matt. Now let's pivot to Oldsmar, Florida. A decidedly slower race was the Tampa Bay Derby. Tampa Bay Derby, race 11 down in Oldsmar on Saturday afternoon. Interesting race in that coming into it, the 8-5 favorite was Candyman Rocket. He had won the Sam F. Davis for Bill Mott, and he did so in solid enough fashion, but felt like there were always those lingering questions about how far does he actually want to go? What was the quality of the field that he ran against and defeated? Tampa Bay Downs is a peculiar spot because sometimes you can see awesome horses deliver completely terrible performances, and you can see kind of subpar horses come through and absolutely shine. And it makes it a difficult handicapping puzzle to sort of decipher and put together. For this race on Saturday, you had a few different things go on, but the most noteworthy for me, and if you are curious about this race, and I forgot about the other piece, the prep rating for the San Felipe. I've been giving ratings 1 to 10 for all of these Derby preps. The San Felipe, I'm giving it a 10. I know. A perfect score? Why? Well, I think you probably have an unbelievably talented racehorse, and I think he defeated a number of really good racehorses. Thus far, I think it's the best race that we have seen, and I think it will be the most critical going forward. It's a 10. I reserve the right to amend it in time. It's a 10, though, the San Felipe. This race that we're about to run, not a 10. The most fascinating piece for me is the number 10 horse, who is the winner, Helium, for Mark Casse. Helium hadn't been seen since before Halloween of last year. He's gone for, let's call it 6 months. Maybe it's not quite. Maybe it's 5. Whatever it is. And in a 1 1/16 race, he runs 1.25 miles. This is him out here, toward the back of the pack with the purple hat on, sort of red body with the white diamonds. I mean, just, I would say bordering on an impossible trip. Outside of the fact that he ends up winning somehow. And I know I'm going to gloss over quite a bit of this. I know there was some herding and some traffic down on the front side. The reason I'm glossing over it is I don't know how good this race actually is. I'm not going to tell you that you need to be going through and watching the tape 15 times to try to make trip notes out of it to think that you're going to find some diamond in the rough. I think it is absolutely worth talking about the winner because this is not a trip that's supposed to work for anyone. For him to be as wide as he was every step of the way, in his first start on dirt, and his first start in five months and change. I mean, there is something to be said about this. Despite the fact that he's not lighting the world on fire as far as the figs are going to be concerned, This is a really nice performance for this racehorse. Now, here's the piece that maybe you want to make note of. Hidden Stash looks like he's about 1-5 right here. That he's going to go on and win by what, 3, 4? And instead he ends up losing by 3/4 of a length. Now, I look at this and say, I want to give credit to Helium. I also have to look at it realistically and say, Hidden Stash, you got to be better than that, bud. If I'm going to take you seriously as a horse for this time of year anyway, for the Kentucky Derby and these sort of races, I think you got to do better than that. Now, fascinating pieces coming out of this. Hidden Stash, I would love to see race again because he's either a combination of a little on the green side, maybe an equipment change wouldn't be the worst thing in the world for this horse. I go through and notice that they've never had blinkers on him. He's paired up career buyer tops of 83 now. Maybe you do get a forward move. Vicky Oliver and company are based in Kentucky. Wouldn't be a stunner to see this horse run in the bluegrass or something like that. I wouldn't mind to see blinkers on. That's just my opinion. I'm not a horseman or a horsewoman. I don't know clearly that much of the game. I'm more about what does the tape say and what do the numbers say. Tape and numbers say he's a little quirky and he's slow. So let's try to wake him up with some blinkers. Just an idea, something to think about. But as is constituted, he's a horse that I don't trust, and right now he's not nearly fast enough to be competitive with some of the better 3-year-olds. The piece, though, with Helium, again, I can't help but be taken by the fact that he's a perfect 3 for 3 now. He won his first 2 starts sprinting on synthetic, going 7/8 of a mile. Won those both in blowout fashion, showed a little bit of early foot too, at least tactical speed. And in this race, I would challenge you to find a more ridiculous trip in which a horse succeeds. Maybe given the circumstances, you're looking at, the Arrowgate trip in the Dubai World Cup. Given the way that Meydan typically plays on the dirt and given the company that he was running against, I understand maybe the bulk of the field wasn't spectacular. He did beat Gunrunner. For him to win the way that he did there on what was seemingly an impossible trip, that's an all-timer. But this here, he's just not supposed to win this race. So again, it could be a combination of two things, or it could be one or the other. He ran against an absolutely dreadful field of racehorses, which I'm certainly not going to rule out. Or he ran an exceptional race and the number is going to be kind of compromised because it can't help but be, given that he ran 10 furlongs in an 8.5 furlong race. Now, the old adage is there are no such things as trips in slow races. So if you prescribe to that idea and that theory, well, the 84 is kind of the 84, and regardless of the fact that he actually was running in Tampa as opposed to Oldsmar, that's that. I at least want to look at this horse. Oh, and the other piece is it doesn't sound like he's going to run again until the first Saturday in May. So this will be a horse who, as a 3-year-old running against 19 other horses, will have run 3 times in his career. 1 time going around 2 turns and 1 time on dirt. I think it's a monumental ask for a horse like this to do anything other than just sort of run around there. But having said that, if you are looking for a horse if you're somebody who likes a superfecta, and let's just get the hypotheticals, right? I believe so far this is a very top-heavy group of horses as far as the 3-year-olds go. Let's say your top 2 to 3 positions in the race are going to be occupied by the chalks. So you don't have a great deal of value as far as your exacta goes or anything like that. And you want to go to the trifecta, and unless you really think that there's somebody interesting underneath that can run third, it's still probably going to be more of those horses who have tactical speed that are just more talented and faster. But if you're playing a superfecta or something along those lines, in which to me, the fourth slot in a 1.25 mile Kentucky Derby becomes much more about who can see out the distance as opposed to who is more talented. Maybe a horse like Helium comes into play, who's going to be 35, 40 to 1, whatever it may be, in the Kentucky Derby. Maybe he's the kind of horse that, I mean, based on this race, I have no reason to believe that he couldn't run 15 miles. Because, again, I wish the Trackus link that I was trying to click on would work. I don't even know if Trackus is still in business, but I tried to find out just how much extra ground he covered. But when I watched the tape the first time, I said, this horse can't possibly win. And sure enough, he does. So, 84 Beyer, it's not a fast race. I don't think he's going to win the Kentucky Derby. I don't think he's going to threaten to win the Derby. But if you're somebody looking to play an extended gimmick, if you're looking at the Superfecta specifically, he's at least mildly intriguing, maybe underneath that at 1,000,000,000 to 1 to try to spice some things up, especially if you think that the top few spots in all likelihood are going to be more formful and rather chalky. I don't know that I love the idea of a horse running 3 times in his career, 1 time going 2 turns, 1 time on dirt before the first Saturday in May, but crazier things have happened, man. I do think that this clearly shows that he has some ability, though. I just don't know if it's going to be the first Saturday in May. Helium at 15 to 1 upsets the Tampa Bay Derby. From a prep rating standpoint, I gave the Sam F. Davis a 3, the race in which Candyman Rocket won. By the way, Candyman Rocket finishes 11th in a field of 12. And I know he's had a bit of a trip in there, but point is, not great. I'm going to give this race a 3. I don't think this is going to have a dramatic effect on the outcome the first Saturday in May, if any at all. And if it does, in my opinion, it might be a Helium, and that's really about it. I would like to see an equipment change with Hidden Stash, and I'd like to see him run at least one more time before the Kentucky Derby, if that is indeed the goal. It also wouldn't bother me if the connections of Hidden Stash said, let's pivot and look at something like the Preakness, and let's get another run into him. Maybe it's not in the Bluegrass, or maybe it is. It's entirely, whatever they see fit, but maybe it's a race like the Lexington, where you then use that as sort of a springboard into the Preakness, and maybe you catch some of the horses out of the Derby, on a quick turnaround, only 2 weeks later. But I think he needs some more experience, and I would love to see him with blinkers next time out. Helium, 84 Beyer, winning this year's Tampa Bay Derby. I give it a 3. Now we'll go north to a race that, in my opinion, is a Derby prep in name only. Let's talk about the one-turn Gotham. Let's wrap up the Derby portion of the recaps here this week with the Gotham. I said it earlier, a Derby prep in name only, in my opinion, simply because it's a one-turn mile. I mean, I don't really know what there is to glean from this in relation to a 2-turn 1.25 mile race or the ability to handle that sort of distance. I'll let the tape run and we'll just kind of talk through it a little bit, but this is another one of those races where I'm not taking a great deal out of it. I suppose if you wanted to, it's more interesting to me for some of the other runners, and perhaps these horses turn into route runners and horses who want to go longer, whether it is Crowded Trade, whether it is Highly Motivated or Freedom Fighter. And I haven't even mentioned the winner Weyburn, but this is just a very odd placement for a race that does award points to the Kentucky Derby. I don't really fully understand it, because you want to talk about apples to oranges. This is not anything that's really going to be applicable for the first Saturday in May, in my opinion. Neither here nor there. Freedom Fighter goes out to the front. The fractions, again, we've talked about it as well. Aqueduct's surface this time of year can yield slower times. 24 and 148 for the half, 12 and 4 for 3/4. Weyburn stalks throughout. Freedom Fighter will eventually be backing up. Here come Chad's horses rolling on the outside. First, you have Crowded Trade. Highly Motivated is trying to follow. But you see Javier's really getting after Highly Motivated, and it just doesn't seem like he's really responding immediately. For a moment, it looks like Crowded Trade's going to go off and win this thing for fun. And again, he is a very promising prospect, but I'm putting him at prospect only right now because he just has a lot to do. And this is part of my concern here, is an inexperience level that, in my opinion, this is him hanging. Because it looks like he should go right on by. He doesn't. You see how late Weyburn is to change leads. He just went over right there to his right lead, and he's going to rally back on the inside and get the job done by a nose. Earns a 95 Beyer. Each of the top two do. Highly Motivated, the third place finisher in his return to the races from Breeders' Cup weekend last year, earns a 92 Beyer. So you got 95s and a 92. Freedom Fighter earns an 87. But what does this really mean going forward? Again, I don't really know that it's going to have a dramatic impact on anything that we see for the first Saturday in May, at least for the Kentucky Derby. I think these are interesting horses. I know Jimmy Jerkins, the trainer of Weyburn, has mentioned the possibility of the Belmont being the target as opposed to the Kentucky Derby. I also am under the impression, I could be wrong, somebody can correct me, that he is not Triple Crown nominated. So they would need to decide in the very near future if they want to do that. But, this is the sort of race that you combine the odd result with a 50 to 1 shot winning with the 1-turn mile configuration with what I'm going to call the Derby division of New York and whatever you want to call this division of New York. Let's say post-Derby or distance limited horses perhaps that are going to be targeting other races in and around the Derby and the Preakness and the Belmont. I don't think this is going to have any real dramatic effect on the outcome of the Kentucky Derby. I think as far as the two Chad horses go, I think they're both really interesting going forward. Highly motivated. I've never been the biggest fan. I know people rave about him. He's talented. Don't get me wrong. I'm not trying to sit here and say he can't run. But he might end up being a nice H. Allen Jerkins type when it's all said and done, looking forward down the road. Maybe he's a Pat Day Mile kind of horse. I don't know. I don't see him as a proper router. Maybe they'll try it in his second start off the bench. Maybe they'll try to get him some Derby points. But I can't imagine it would be in New York, the same owner-trainer combo as risk-taking. And he's going to be going in the Wood Memorial. I think he's a deserving one of, if not the outright favorite for that race, risk-taking. So, highly motivated, fine. Crowded Trade to me is probably slightly more interesting. Again, I thought he hung his chance right there, but this was his first time against winners, first time going out to let's call it a route of ground. It was a 1-turn mile as opposed to the 3/4 race that he ran in his career debut, but still far too early to make a definitive statement on what he is or what kind of distances he wants. I don't think the distance got him beat. I just think he kind of hung. So maybe that'll be one that you want to keep an eye on going forward, but as far as the Derby goes, I don't really see this race having any real impact, and therefore I'm going to give it a 1 on a scale of 1 to 10. I think you may have some ability in this race, but I don't think, as far as the Kentucky Derby and the prep races go, I don't think this is going to have any say on the Kentucky Derby. So I'm going to give this a 1 out of 10, not as an indication of what I think of the talent or the ability of any of these horses. I just don't think it's going to have any direct impact on the result for the Kentucky Derby. Let me know if you agree or disagree, what your thoughts are about the Gotham, the Tampa Bay Derby, as well as the San Felipe. Now we'll wrap up episode 56 with a quick run through the two Grade 1s out in Southern California, the Anita Handicap, as well as the Kilroe Mile, and we'll button this thing up. All right, let's wrap up episode 56 with two quick hitters going back at the two Grade 1s at Santa Anita. I know there were other stakes races. I know there were other important events out there, but the two Grade 1s are the only other ones that I'm going to touch on. The Grade 1 Kilroe Mile. Hit the Road wins, defeats Smooth Like Straight. They both earned 97 buyers. In the immediate aftermath, I said, well, maybe this is finally the year that the West Coast turfers are genuinely ones to be taken, taken seriously on the bigger stage. But you see the Fig, and I mean, these are very consistent horses, specifically Smooth Like Straight. It feels like he shows up, he's going to run 95 to 98 as far as a buyer goes. Or maybe 95 to 97, if you will. Some of these other horses, though, Hit the Road, I really thought coming out of that most recent start, we were going to see a giant move forward, and we didn't. We saw a good effort, but he had a perfect trip throughout. Took a nice smooth ride from Florent Giroux down to the inside to find that seam and go on and kick on. I'm not saying that this was a bad race, but I also, now in hindsight, with a little bit of time and watching the tape a few more times, I don't love it either. And if you really want to get into the weeds on the speed figure thing, and this is an instance where I will certainly side with, again, the fact that it's not as simple as the number's the number because of the time. You got to kind of there is some subjectivity to it, because this race, a Grade 1 at a mile, which was run two races after an allowance race at a mile, was considerably slower on the clock. Whisper Not stopped the clock two races earlier in 33-1. Hit the Road stopped the clock in 34-2. So, I mean, we're talking about 6 lengths. And Hit the Road earned a 97 and Whisper Not earned a 94. And at face value, you would say, well, Whisper Not ran much, much faster. He must get a giant number. Well, then you have to start looking at it saying, well, how likely is it that Rip City improved his career best fig from an 85 to somewhere in the high 90 range? It's possible, but unlikely. You can say the same for Tripoli. Tripoli is a horse who, on his best day, is an 85 type. Did he really get into the low 90 range based on this effort? Tiberius Mercurius, I suppose you can say the 75, you could have got him back up into the low 80 range where he typically has lived. But then these other horses, you're really trying to make a case that for being defeated by a pretty healthy margin. I mean, some of these horses, 4, 5, 6, and 7, they were defeated by 10, 11 lengths. You're trying to make an argument that they actually improved what they typically do despite losing by a country mile. Seems unlikely. Conversely, you take a look at the Kilroe Mile and you say, most of these horses, despite the fact that the clock didn't come back all that great, they usually are in the mid to high 90 range. Hit the Road's 97 makes sense. Smooth Like Straight's does. Count Again's does. Flavius's does. Royal Ship does. Casa Creed, this makes sense. If anything, it's a bit of a regression for him. Ride a Comet didn't fire his best shot, nor did Spirit Animal. It kind of all makes sense. So this is an instance where, despite the fact, and it goes basically in direct contrast to what I was talking about earlier with a horse like Life is Good. That number, given the way everything else played out on the day, yes, it's a little bit aggressive, but it seems well within the realm of possibility. This situation with the allowance race compared to this grade 1, it seems very unlikely that so many of those horses in that allowance race improved their numbers so dramatically in that they would have been among the contenders in a grade 1. Doesn't seem likely, and I think that's why you look at a number like the 97 that Hit the Road and Smooth Like Straight both earned and say, yeah, makes sense. And the 94 for Whisper Not, yeah, makes sense despite the fact that he ran much faster on the clock. The only thing I will throw in about this race specifically, Smooth Like Straight, go back and watch the tape. Of all the times that I have watched him, I don't recall him being sort of, I don't want to say unprofessional, but late with a lead change. He was very late in this race, and typically for a horse who was campaigned as pretty steadily as he was as a 3-year-old, this was his first start since the end of December on opening day at Santa Anita. I would at least keep an eye on that and think long and hard next time out. He's got that beautiful tactical speed. It's always going to make him a player. But when they do something that they don't typically do, that's when you want to make a note of that and say something to keep an eye on, because it could potentially mean we're trending the wrong direction. Count Again, of all the horses in this race, he's the one I'm most interested in, I think, simply because, at least for the next start, long term, you can make an argument for a number of these horses. But for the next race, Count Again, coming off of that race that he was eased in, off of a lengthy layoff, for him to charge home the way that he did, if you break it down as far as the Racing Form's formulator product is concerned, he flashed home in 23:22. I mean, that's far and away the fastest come-home time in the race. The only other one that was remotely close, you had Royal Ship in 22:50, and you had Spirit Animal in 22:65. I mean, he was motoring home for his first start off of a little bit of a layoff, and the fact that there really wasn't a great deal of passing in this race. It was pretty formful as far as where you were positioned on the turf. It's more or less where you held, or you were making up a length or two, or vice versa, losing a length or two. Count Again flashed home in a big, big way. I would think he's going to be a threat wherever the connections choose to go with him next, and I could see him being successful out at 1 1/8. That does make me wonder a little bit. Does a horse like Count Again all of a sudden slot in to a race like the Turf Classic on the Derby undercard, as opposed to some of these other horses who they feel like more crack milers? Maybe Count Again, maybe at heart he is a miler, but keep in mind he won that Seabiscuit at 1 1/16. Maybe a horse like Count Again is one that you want to keep in mind, and maybe he could be looking at a race like that Turf Classic on the Derby undercard in a couple months' time. As far as the Grade 1 Santa Anita Handicap is concerned, I think Idol ran a good race. I think, on the day he was the best horse. And I liked Express Train in there, and I thought he just got beat on the square. I thought it was a good effort from him. Both of the top two earned 102 Beyer speed figures. Maxfield, the third place finisher, He has now paired up career buyer tops of 99. Independence Hall finishes fourth with a 98. And Tism Magician earns a 97, which, again, now we really want to start kind of splitting hairs here, or at least thinking bigger picture. Is it likely that Tism Magician, running fifth in this race, ran the best race of his life? Possible. Likely? I don't know if I would say that. Now, maybe he has wanted distance all along. He didn't get the lead, which has basically been his MO to run his best races. I think it's unlikely. Okay, well, if that's the case, when we take a look and you see someone like Independence Hall, who I have always thought has distance limitations. I think he's a one-turn horse at heart. I would love them to turn him back. He ran credibly, given that I don't think he wants any part of this distance. But he looked loaded, and if he had the ability to see it, he would have shot through and had a chance. And instead, he flattened out down the lane. Turn him back. The bigger piece is, what's the likelihood that he ran a 98, which is 6 points off his career best, which is a 104, which is another piece that we'll get to momentarily. If you took, let's say 3 to 4 points off, well, then that all of a sudden brings him into the 93, 94 range, which is going to be on par with really what his best races have been. And again, in the grand scheme of things, nothing to sneeze at, considering he's running at a distance that's too far for him. You take 3 or 4 points off of Tism Magician at a 97, that gets you into the 93 range, which kind of is where he lives, 93, 94. You do the same thing with a horse like Kiss Today Goodbye, who, again, outside of a couple of one-off performances, seemingly, this was, a reasonable number. I'm not saying that this is a number that I'm really diving deep into. But the point is, for Idol and Express Train, Idol specifically, I mean, he improved his career best 4 points here. Express Train moved up a couple points. Maxfield paired up the 99s. I suppose you look at it and say Maxfield ran his race, and it just wasn't good enough. I don't know. I wonder if it's a little bit on the generous side. But the bigger piece, though, to take out of this race for me, Maxfield, I don't want to say he got exposed, but I think he is a fine older horse, and we'll leave it at that. I think Idol and Express Train are good older horses. I don't think they're superstars. I do think this is a prime opportunity for either a fresh face for the older group or specifically these 3-year-olds. Because if these 3-year-olds continue on the path that they've sort of set to start this 2021 campaign, I mean, they are all going to be heard from at some point against older horses. You may want to keep an eye on the Pegasus World Cup as a whole, because now we've had 6 horses come out of it, including the 2 horses that went over to Saudi Arabia. And outside of Last Judgment, who won this past weekend in a stakes race at Tampa Bay Downs, the Grade 3 Challenger, he won with a 97 buyer. Outside of that, this has been a pretty putrid race. And for a Grade 1 that, is trying to sort of establish itself as an early, it's becoming more and more the Don Handicap with a big purse than it is any sort of a comp to the Breeders' Cup Classic or the Dubai World Cup or even the Saudi Cup, because this field looks rough right now, because you had Independence Hall come back and earned a 98 in that run on Saturday. He was your 3rd place finisher. Knicks Go, we know he finished 4th out there in Saudi Arabia. Sleepy Ice Todd finished 5th. Coastal Defense finished 7th in the Big Cap. Kiss Today Goodbye, 6th in the Big Cap. Last Judgment wins a Grade 3 down at Tampa. Jesus' team, we'll find out where he comes back, Code of Honor, any of these other horses. But the point is, thus far, I would think long and hard before I took a short price on any of these horses who ran in the Pegasus World Cup this year anyway. Maybe down the road, and again, you see good and bad versions of races every year. Sometimes they're brilliant, sometimes they're horrible. This one, I don't think this is going to be one for the record book. And if it is, it's for all the wrong reasons, just because you have a bunch of horses that came back and didn't do any real running. So those are my thoughts on those 2 Grade 1s. Let me know if you have anything else to add in the comment section beneath the video player on YouTube or on Twitter at Bernier_Matt. Please follow me over there as well. However you listen to this thing, thank you for doing so. And again, if you want to be part of the Friday feature next week, and again, on next Monday's show, the idea is to get the two individuals who we highlighted at the top of the show, hopefully to get them involved. You got to email me at bernier.matt89@gmail.com. Those two individuals, plus anyone who wants to be part of the show next week, next Monday. All you need to do beneath the video player, write Friday feature. I'll do a random draw with the old Google machine. We'll fire up the random number generator, whoever it is. I'll contact you, and we'll get something set up. But any other comments, questions, all those sort of things, leave them down there as well, because I do go through and read it all, and I'm very curious to hear what folks have to say, good, bad, or indifferent. For all of the content, please rate, review, and subscribe. If you're somebody audio only, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, SoundCloud, inthemoneypodcast.com. Number of places to find it. Again, if you're on YouTube, search bar Matt Bernier Show. You get this episode along with the 55 prior. Until next Monday's show, best of luck however you play, whatever you play, and wherever you play. This has been episode 56 of the Matt Bernier Show.